Krka is the best-known Adriatic river. Famous for its waterfalls, flow-through lakes, and remarkably rich cultural heritage, it's one of Croatia's most important natural landscapes. Although most people experience Krka as a one-day trip, the river deserves a much wider view. Only when you follow its course from start to finish do you really see how complex it is and how many natural phenomena it hides along the way. The water that bursts into thousands of droplets at Skradinski Book has in fact traveled a very long way. Rain and snow fall across the high plateaus of Dinara and Svalaha, mountains that receive almost twice as much precipitation as the river's mouth. The limestone landscape is highly porous, so most of this water immediately disappears underground. Although the surface may appear dry and waterless, beneath it a vast hidden network of fissures and channels is formed. Through these underground routes, water from the mountains and even from the Grahovo area in Bosnia and Herzegovina eventually makes its way to the source of the Krka. The main spring lies at the foot of Mount Dinara, beneath the Krka River waterfall. What makes it especially striking is that the spring itself emerges from within a 22-meter-high waterfall, where water surges powerfully straight out of the Travertine rock. This meeting of surface and underground water is one of Krka's first great phenomena, a place where the river is, almost literally, born from stone within another waterfall. The Krka River stream, which plunges over this cliff into the Krka, perfectly illustrates the rhythm of a karst landscape. In spring and after heavy rainfall, Krka River swells and flows with force, forming a broad curtain of water over the Travertine barrier. In summer, however, it often dries up completely. What remains is a massive, bare Travertine wall, and the waterfall turns into an empty stage, an eloquent reminder of the changeable nature of the Dalmatian karst. It is precisely this seasonal contrast that makes Krka River so remarkable, a natural cycle in which a river disappears for months, only to return with the first significant rain. After the source, the river enters the Nin field, a broad, flat plain surrounded by low hills and open farmland. Along the edges of the field, numerous springs emerge, giving rise to tributaries that feed the Krka. Farther downstream, near Skradinski Book, the Chikola joins the river, and the entire Krka catchment expands to more than 2,500 square kilometers. Across the plains of the Nin field, the Krka forms alluvial terraces, fertile surfaces created by the gradual deposition of sand and gravel. Here, the river flows slowly, broken only by occasional rapids, bordered by a narrow ribbon of trees that traces its course through the open plain. At Bryan Lake, the landscape changes abruptly. The soft plains give way to typical Dalmatian karst-bare rock, intense summer heat, and vegetation adapted to survive extreme conditions. Here, the Krka cuts into a deep and steep gorge. In places, the canyon walls rise up to 200 meters, and access to the water is possible only at a few naturally gentler sections. Where the rock is more susceptible to mechanical erosion, the river widens slightly. Transverse faults and tectonic fractures also open the canyon at certain points, creating broader sections along its course. Such places include Roški Waterfall, the area around the Krka Monastery, and the northern part of Vizovac Lake. Alongside the Krka Canyon, travertine barriers are among the river's most distinctive features. They form through the deposition of calcium carbonate, but only where a precise set of conditions comes together: clean, limestone, rich water, and constantly sunlit sections of the river. Equally important, indeed essential to this process, are living organisms, above all mosses, which trap tiny mineral particles on their surfaces and create the foundation for travertine growth. Aquatic plants, algae, and bacteria also play a role, binding and depositing carbonate, so that, over centuries, travertine builds up layer by layer. Like a natural wall, it reshapes the river's course, creating lakes, barriers, and ultimately waterfalls. On the Krka, there are 7 major travertine barriers, each the result of this quiet yet continuous construction. The first in the series is Belušić Buk, a waterfall that opens this travertine gallery. It stretches for about 300 meters, with a total drop of 22.4 meters. 2 main cascades break the flow into dense white foam, while a sequence of smaller steps further slows the water. Here, the true power of the Krka is felt for the first time, the sound echoing off the rock walls, the mist slowly rising, and vegetation pushing through around the waterfall in thick, dark green layers. In spring, when water from Mount Dinara fills the river, Belušić Buk becomes broad and forceful, far more dynamic than in summer, when the flow diminishes. Just 2 kilometers downstream lies Bryan, another waterfall at its most beautiful in spring. Even in antiquity, a road crossed this travertine barrier, and the remains of stone arches still bear witness to the importance of this area. Nearby are the remains of the Roman military camp of Burnham. Burnham was a major Roman stronghold, the headquarters of the 11th Legion, positioned strategically above the Krka to control routes leading into the interior of Dalmatia. The camp was built in the 1st century and later expanded during the reign of Emperor Vespasian. Today, the most recognizable remains of Burnham are its monumental stone arches. In spring, the surrounding landscape opens into wide meadows filled with flowers. Soft patches of pink, purple, and yellow bloom in vivid contrast to the pale limestone and the Roman arches rising above the vegetation. The scene gives the entire area an almost idyllic, peaceful character. As summer arrives, however, the landscape changes abruptly. Under the intense Dalmatian sun, the meadows turn dry and yellow. This strong seasonal contrast further emphasizes the dramatic atmosphere of Burnham and its position at the heart of the Dalmatian karst. Only a few scattered black ash trees grow here, punctuating the otherwise open, sun-exposed terrain. Just a few hundred meters downstream begin the Manojlovac waterfalls, the highest waterfalls along the entire river. The main drop is 32 meters high, while the full sequence of cascades reaches nearly 60 meters in total height. In summer, the falls are often completely dry, a clear reminder of how sensitive the karst system is to changes in rainfall. In spring and early summer, however, the Manojlovac waterfalls turn into a true spectacle. Water plunges from the heights and spreads across a broad rock face, creating a powerful roar that echoes throughout the canyon. Seen from above, the waterfall resembles a single, vast white curtain. Up close, it dissolves into a fine drifting mist. Beside the waterfall lie the remains of old stone mills, now abandoned but still recognizable through their foundations, walls, and traces of former water channels. They are a testament to a time when the power of the Manojlovac waterfalls was an essential part of everyday life and the local economy. Today, Krka National Park has arranged a network of paths and several scenic viewpoints around the falls. From the upper viewpoints, panoramic views open across the entire cascade system, while lower trails lead closer to the water, offering a completely different experience: the smell of the spray, the sound that overwhelms everything else, and a direct sense of the river's strength at its most alive. According to tradition, the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph once remarked that the Manojlovac waterfalls were the most beautiful sight in Dalmatia. When they are full of water, it is easy to understand why. Downstream lies Rošnac, the smallest yet most hidden waterfall on the Krka. It is only 8 meters high, but set within an exceptionally steep canyon that makes it almost inaccessible. The Miljacka waterfall follows, composed of 3 larger and numerous smaller steps, with a total height of 24 meters. It is enclosed by a deep canyon, and its rhythm is shaped by the underground system that supplies it with water. Farther downstream, the canyon continues through a series of longer rapids. Rising above the river are the medieval fortresses of Travertine and Nekvan, positioned at strategically important points on opposite sides of the canyon, where they once controlled movement along the river corridor. In a wider section of the valley stands the Krka Monastery, first mentioned in 1402. Today, it is one of the most important spiritual centers of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Croatia, known for its rich artistic collection and the underground burial chambers hidden beneath the complex. The next waterfall does not appear for another 14 kilometers. Roški Slap stretches for 650 meters and reaches a width of 400 meters. It is best known for a series of small, regular travertine barriers known as the necklaces. These are low, almost terrace cascades, arranged one after another in a precise natural sequence. Water flows gently over them in thin sheets, creating a mosaic of small pools, narrow channels, and calmer basins where reeds and other wetland plants take hold. Here the water rushes, there it slows and spreads, giving this part of the waterfall a distinctly soft, lively rhythm. Ducks often rest here, hidden among dense aquatic vegetation, while dragonflies are almost always seen hovering above the water. For them, the necklaces provide ideal breeding grounds: shallow waters, sunlit edges, and clean, slow-flowing conditions. In the central section of Roški Slap, the river breaks into small islands and side channels, and the entire structure ends in a broad, 15-meter-high water fan that spills into the calmer waters of Visovac Lake. Nearby are numerous old mills, and above the waterfall lies Ozidiana Cave, an important archaeological site where evidence of human presence dating back thousands of years has been discovered. Downstream, the Krka widens into Visovac Lake, in essence a slow-flowing section of the river. It is not the only one of its kind. The entire Krka is shaped by a series of travertine barriers and flow-through lakes, but Visovac is the largest among them. At the center of the lake lies the small island. In the 14th century, hermits of St. Augustine built a monastery here, which was taken over by Bosnian Franciscans in the 15th century, who remain on the island to this day. The monastery houses a valuable collection of books, manuscripts, and archaeological artifacts, bearing witness to centuries of spiritual and cultural life in this secluded setting. At the end of Vizovac Lake, the river Čikola flows into the Krka. Like the Krka itself, the Čikola runs through a deep canyon at times, even steeper and more dramatic than Krka's. Rising above the confluence is Ključica, another medieval fortress. Built in the 13th century, it was later briefly held by the Ottomans. Today it stands abandoned, yet still offers an exceptional view over the entire canyon. Where the Čikola gradually emerges from its canyon, Lake Torak strengthens the river close to the confluence. It is an almost perfectly circular lake, a karst spring with a depth of between 30 and 50 meters and a diameter of around 150 meters. It serves as an important water supply for the surrounding region, including the city of Šibenik. The catchment of the Torak spring is likely very large, with underground waters flowing in from a wide area. The confluence of the Čikola and the Krka was formed by the rise of the Travertine barrier of Skradinski Book. As a result, the lowest 3 kilometers of the Čikola's course are flooded, just like the lower section of the Krka itself. What makes this confluence unique is a narrow travertine barrier that separates the Krka from the Čikola, nearly 700 meters long, yet only about 10 meters wide. Here, reeds and other wetland vegetation thrive, along with animal species adapted to marsh habitats. Just upstream of the waterfall, a small labyrinth of pools, reed beds, and wooded patches spreads out, where the current becomes barely perceptible. Water spills into broad, shallow basins, and the slower flow allows reeds, bulrushes, water lilies, and lotus leaves to cover the surface like a living mosaic. This is a small underwater jungle in clear, yet still cold water, a final moment of calm before one of the most impressive waterfalls in Europe. The vegetation here is exceptionally rich, with as many as 860 plant species, made possible by the meeting of Mediterranean and sub-Mediterranean climates. In the lake and surrounding waters lives a range of endemic fish species, which can occur here in large numbers. Skradinski Buk is the last great tufa barrier on the river, formed precisely at the confluence of the Krka and the Čikola. It is the largest and most intricately developed tufa waterfall system on the Krka, and one of the most impressive in Europe. Stretching for about 800 meters and up to 400 meters in width, it overcomes a height difference of 47.5 meters. The waterfall consists of 17 major and numerous smaller tufa steps, creating a complex network of islets, channels, and rapids. Seen from above, it resembles a mosaic of water and greenery. From ground level, it feels like an endless breaking and spilling of the river into hundreds of tiny streams. Beyond this first impression of monumentality lies a very different world, hidden corners and quiet pockets of water where the river seems to pause for a moment, only to continue its journey immediately after. Here, the boundary between land and water is almost non-existent. Tufa shelves form transitional spaces that are neither fully dry nor fully submerged. In the shade of reeds, along the edges of channels and around low islets, the water takes on its smallest forms, thin jets, swift whirlpools, and barely audible dripping that blends into a single, continuous sound. It is a landscape where calm and power constantly alternate. A moment of silence on one side of the path and the force of a waterfall just a few meters away. Skradinski Buk thus feels like a living organism, where every channel, cascade, and stream has its own rhythm. Where water spreads across the tufa, there is a sense of something timeless, as if the river is endlessly renewing itself, yet always remaining the same. Perhaps this is its greatest allure. At Skradinski Buk, it is easy to forget the boundaries we impose and accept those shaped by nature boundaries that flow and merge, rather than forming rigid lines. Here, you can also find restored watermills, traditional stone buildings that speak of how crucial the river's power once was in everyday life. In the past, almost every village along the Krka had its own small section of the falls. In these mills, grain was ground for the entire area. Other buildings were used to soften and clean wool, while the stupa, driven day and night by the river's natural flow, rhythmically beat cloth as part of the finishing process. Inside these stone huts, traces of that former life can still be felt. Grooves in the floor where water once passed, wooden beams that carried the load of mill wheels for centuries, and simple yet ingenious mechanisms that turn natural force into labor. The sound of the mill was once the pulse of this landscape. The creak of wooden wheels and the steady pounding of the stupa formed the everyday soundtrack for generations who lived by the Krka. Skradinski Buk was far more than a natural spectacle. It was an economic center, a place of work, gathering, and exchange. Water power was the most valuable resource here, and using it well was the foundation of survival and local prosperity. In 1895, the Krka hydroelectric power plant was built at Skradinski Buk, one of the first in Europe. Thanks to it, Šibenik received electric lighting before many major European cities. Although it is no longer operating, the plant is protected as an industrial heritage site and remains an important chapter in the history of energy. Today, Skradinski Buk is the most visited area of Krka National Park. In summer, thousands of people walk its wooden paths and footbridges, yet despite the crowds, the power of the water does not lose its strength. Today, alongside Plitvice Lakes, Krka is the most famous and most visited national park in Croatia, partly because close to the Adriatic coast, making it a frequent stop for visitors traveling through the region in summer. In the past, it was possible to swim just beyond the final cascade of Skradinski Buk, a favorite form of refreshment during the hottest summer days. The cold, crystal-clear water, surrounded by lush greenery, offered a unique and intimate experience of the river. Today, however, swimming in this area is completely prohibited in order to protect the site. This measure has allowed the tufa barriers to stabilize and natural processes to continue without additional pressure, preserving Skradinski Buk for future generations. The final cascades of Skradinski Buk, indeed, of the entire Krka, are the park's most iconic scene. Shaped whimsically by tufa, broken into multiple falls that naturally complement one another, they form a distinctive water panorama. Yet beneath them, hidden from many eyes, lies a remarkable underwater world. The waterfalls plunge deep into the river, creating a realm of bubbles, white foam, and turbulent, unstable mixtures of water and air that seem to boil from within, constantly renewing themselves. This is the concealed layer of Skradinski Buk, a world where the river's power reveals itself far below the surface. Immediately below Skradinski Book, the presence of the sea can already be felt. This is where the Krka Estuary begins the river's final 23-kilometer stretch, where fresh river water meets the salty Adriatic. Swimmers once experienced this quite literally. At the surface, the water was cold and completely fresh, but just a little deeper, it became increasingly brackish. Between the two lay a very thin, almost invisible boundary where fresh and salt water do not mix, but slide over one another. The sea's influence is also confirmed by the wildlife found here: eels arriving from the sea and moving upstream, and mullet lingering in the calm, transitional waters of the estuary. This zone is therefore a unique blend of river and marine worlds. Along the riverbed, seawater slowly pushes upstream, while fresh river water flows seaward above it. After Skradinski Book, the Krka flows briefly through a wide, tranquil canyon. The current is slow, the water deeper and clearer, making this stretch ideal for tourist boats that carry visitors daily towards Skradin town. On one side rise steep rock faces and woodland, on the other reeds still dominate. The only sound is the soft rustle of water against the hull. At the end of this stretch, where the river widens once more, lies Skradin, one of the oldest towns on the Adriatic and the gateway to the national park. Skradin is a small town of narrow stone streets, quiet squares, and houses topped with classic Dalmatian roofs. Its marina sits at the heart of the town and fills with sailing boats from around the world in summer. Though small, Skradin carries a long history. Once a Roman settlement, later a medieval stronghold, an important port and trading center. Today, it is known not only as a peaceful starting point for visiting Krka, but as a destination in its own right. For many visitors, this is where they first sense the meeting of fresh and saltwater Dalmatia, the scent of the sea, the sound of the river, and the warmth of stone streets combining into a distinctly Mediterranean atmosphere. After Skradin, the Krka gradually widens and becomes Lake Procleon, a large, calm expansion of the river. The lake has an irregular shape, with numerous reed-lined bays, and because of the slower flow, the water here is more turbid, muddier, and shallower. The wild Guducha stream also flows into it, one of the best preserved natural watercourses in the region, its cold waters creating favorable habitats for many fish and bird species. The coexistence of these different aquatic environments forms rich and diverse wetlands. For centuries, people from nearby villages have used the lake for fishing. Beyond Procleon, the Krka once again enters a canyon and then flows through the Šibenik Bay toward its mouth. Yet the river was once longer than it is today. The present-day St. Anthony's Channel, which connects Šibenik Bay with the open sea, was during the last ice age actually the lower canyon of the Krka. At that time, sea level was more than 100 meters lower, and the river flowed through a deeply incised valley. Only after the glaciers melted and sea levels gradually rose in the post-glacial period did the sea flood the canyon, creating the marine passage through which ships now approach Šibenik. The depth at the mouth reaches as much as 43 meters, clearly showing how strongly changes in sea level have shaped today's landscape. The Krka Estuary is thus one of the most striking examples in Croatia of the interaction between river and marine processes, a landscape that almost literally reveals the geological history of the past 10,000 years. Most of its course, including the canyons, waterfalls, flowing lakes, and surrounding landscapes, is protected within Krka National Park. This protection has allowed the river to remain close to its natural state. Travertine barriers and waterfalls continue to grow, rare plant and animal species persist, and cultural heritage from watermills to monasteries and fortresses remains part of a living landscape. Thanks to its national park status, Krka is not only a visitor destination, but also an important area for scientific research, education, and the long-term protection of a unique karst ecosystem. Krka is a river whose natural processes can be observed in real time. The growth of travertine barriers, shifting water courses, the disappearance and return of water, and the formation of new habitats. It is a place where geology, hydrology, history, and human presence converge. A river that shaped this landscape over millennia and today protects it as a national park. It is difficult to take it all in within a single day, but every step along the Krka reveals a fragment of its larger story.